Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of the Community Health and Capital podcast with Nightingale Hills CIC. Today I've got with me Paul Miller from Bethnal Green Ventures. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
I think we have a common friend and kindred spirit in Rob Hughes, who I was at university with, that I came across yourselves on social media and LinkedIn. And it seemed to be you were doing some really interesting work around supporting startups, supporting innovation, supporting new ideas, but bringing a little bit of a kind of social ethos, I guess, to that, really, in a world that isn't always full of that, let's say, these days. But tell us a bit more about yourself, Paul, and what Bethnal Green Ventures has been up to, if you can.
Yeah, sure. So Bethnal Green Ventures has we've actually been around since 2012. We're an investment firm that focuses on what we call tech for good businesses. So those are for-profit companies, but they're also trying to have a positive social or environmental benefit. And we love backing them when they're really, really early. So when they're like two or three people with usually a prototype of something, maybe an app or a piece of sort of a device sometimes as well, where they can show us that if that thing grew and was successful, it would have like a really positive impact for the people who used it, or sometimes for people around them as well. And one of the big focus areas for us is health. So that could be preventative health, could be stuff to do actually in the clinical setting, and it could be to do with mental health or physical health. So we've backed, well, probably uh, I would say at least 75 companies that are focused on health in one way or another over the last 10, 12 years.
Fascinating. And just talk us through the process, Paul. How does it work for a company that wants to come to you and apply?
Yeah, so twice a year we have what we call our call for ventures, which is an open application process. Anybody can come to our website and apply online for investment and support. Um, and the typical our first investment is £60,000 into those companies. So which is in the grand scheme of like sort of the tech world, that's pretty small investment. It's really there to help people to go through those first 3 6 months of trying something out. And sorry, um, what we also provide them with is a 6 week program of support that basically tries to shortcut all the things we've learned over the last 10 years and all the companies that we've backed have learned. Sort of the mistakes that if somebody told you fairly early on, you could avoid making, and hopefully that helps people like get to where they want to go faster. And then after that 6 weeks, we look at providing follow-on investment to those companies as well. So that's typically £250,000, within 12 to 18 months after that first investment, and then maybe up to £750,000, maybe another year or so after that. And so we're looking to invest, about £1 million into the companies that really start to do well. I think the key thing is though they don't all do well. We're backing companies at such a risky stage where actually some of them just don't work out because they when they get a little bit further along they find that it's not the right thing, it's not the right product, or there's reasons why that won't work now, or the team maybe doesn't work out as well. We have plenty of teams that realize they're not quite the right team to deliver that. But yeah, the ones that do work out do tend to like move pretty quickly and get to a point where they, some of our companies are now working with millions and millions of users.
It's a real privilege to have seen that many companies and then things be developed over that period of time. So that's really exciting. I just wondered, it's fairly big sums we're talking about, really, isn't it? And I just wondered what it's been like to attract that funding into the program and perhaps any of the motivations you've come across for the companies of what would make them put this in.
Yeah, so the kinds of investors who back us, so we've attracted about £50 million over the last 10, 12 years of commitments. But they're all organizations who I think believe in the positive power of technology if you do it right. There's none of them that are blindly optimistic that all tech is good. And I think, if you look at the world of big tech and what's been going on in Silicon Valley and so on, you can it's really obvious now that tech can do bad as well. But the kinds of people who back us are people who think that there is positive possibilities, but they recognize that you've got to like back people like Bethnal Green Ventures, where to be honest, we're quite, I guess, sophisticated in the way that we work with companies. We're always asking ourselves, what might be the unintended consequences of this technology. We're very mindful of thinking through all of the positive and the negative impacts of the things we back. So I mean, some of them are big companies like M&G, the financial services company. We've got some trusts and foundations that have backed us as well, and then also the British Business Bank, who are obviously they're part of the government as well. So we've got a real range of people who back us to do this, but they're all, I think, motivated by the positive potential of technology to solve some of these problems.
Okay. Do you come across many people in government or the public sector or from any public services that are
Yeah,
interested in what you do? Or
yeah, definitely. I think quite a lot of our startups have something to do with the NHS in one way or another, and that's changed over the years. Actually, when we first started out, I think there was pretty deep resistance to startups coming and working with the NHS. But over time, I think that's changed, and actually, the big sort of, I guess, moment when things really changed was actually during the pandemic, when I think a lot of people working in the NHS realized that they did need some of these tech and virtual services in order to even be able to do their jobs at all, let alone do them well. So there was a big sort of shift towards using tech and virtual services during the pandemic, which hasn't really gone backwards, if you see what I mean. It's now normal to do things like online consultations or to be given digital materials to uh, before you have an operation and things like that. So those things have all moved on. But yeah, I think the NHS has become much more receptive to startups. It's not perfect by any means in terms of like there's justifiably lots of hoops and safety and procurement things you have to work with. But the NHS is generally, we find now, much more receptive than it used to be to working with innovative startups that can genuinely help to solve problems and save money.
interesting. You mentioned unintended consequences before. I just wondered that there must be different schools of thought around tech and innovation of, first of all, well, we can't stop it. So how do we shape it? How do we part of it? How do we try to bend it to a good outcome? But there must also be people that are saying or thinking, well, even if we have a positive intent or a vision for how we make it do good in the world, are we, by associating with it or by
Mm.
supporting it, are we kind of continuing or accelerating that juggernaut of all the tech doing the bad stuff? I don't know what you think, Paul.
Yeah, it's a really live issue, to be honest. And I think we find ourselves almost like navigating this tightrope between like fear on one side of what technology is capable of and what some of the motivations behind big technology companies are. And I talk to people all the time where they sort of despairing almost of like how much power that technology has in our lives. But then on the other side, you've also got the magic of what technology can like deliver for people in their daily lives. And if you're offered something that genuinely like improves the way that uh, your diabetes, for example, because it helps you to maintain habits that are positive, and so your condition gets better, then that feels magical because so we're always dancing around this issue of like the fear of technology on the one side, but also the magic that you can get from it in terms of the positive impacts on people's lives. And the way that we particularly look to try and support companies is where um, essentially the more of the product or service they sell, the more positive impact there is. So the the impact that they're trying to have, whether that's on reducing waiting times, for example, they would set their business model so that they only get paid effectively if they do reduce that waiting time, those kinds of things. So they try to align the impact that they're having rather than it being like just an extra thing that you get. They try to align the business model with the impact, and that we found is pretty reliable way of making sure that you do have that positive impact at the heart of the business. And then but you still have to keep an eye out for the things that you didn't think about, like what happens, for example, if we've got one startup, for example, a doctor who are one of the biggest providers of smart appointment systems now for the NHS. Very aware of, okay, well, what happens to those administrative staff, for example, when you've got an automated system? What does it do for them? And I mean, the truth is actually it's had a very positive impact, and in many cases has freed them up to be able to do other things and to do more patient-facing things in the situations where it's being used well. But they had to think about that all the time, and that's another thing that we encourage, is to constantly encourage our startups to be thinking about, okay, well, as we grow, as we get bigger and bigger, what are the next, like, unintended consequences? Sometimes if you think of them ahead of time, they're not unintended. You can shape them into something that's positive. So yeah, I think those are the two sides of it. One is trying to make sure that the positive impact is right at the core of the startup and what they're trying to do, but then also constantly horizon scanning, almost for thinking what could go wrong, and then trying to take steps to avoid that.
Interesting. There's obviously a lot of sophisticated thinking going on how you support in that direction these companies. I just not all of this is money, is it, at the end of the day, really? And I suppose I'm thinking about kind of the east of London, Bethnal Green. It's gone through quite a change, hasn't it? I guess really over many years. Um, Not to say immediately all that in terms of the kind of development has always been positive, really, but I just wondered, as well as money, in your experience from where you are at Bethnal Green Ventures, what do you think is needed in an ecosystem to lend towards either A, a kind of startup culture, but B, a kind of startup for good culture too, maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, when we first started out, the reason why we worked at the super early stage, if you like, was that we were trying to build that ecosystem from the ground up. So at the time there weren't many tech for good startups that were already big and established. So we had to work at the earliest stages. We still do that though. I think you constantly have to build up those ecosystems. It's not like you just do it and then it's done. If you see what I mean, ecosystems need people who are working on the ecosystem. But over time, we've realized that there's various different groups who need to be part of that, and you need to rub them up against each other almost. And for us, that's been like growing the group of investors. So we don't just want all these deals for ourselves. We genuinely want to bring other people in to invest in the startups as well. So which is a bit counterintuitive in terms of, you think they're the competition for us, but actually no, it's much better for us if there's other investors backing the startups too, and that could be angel investors, and there's obviously quite a lot of like tax reliefs and different things you can do in the UK to help that happen. But then there's also the potential customers. So that's, we've always tried to make sure that we're in touch with, the people in the NHS or in the energy sector or whatever it might be, to try and make sure that they're bumping up against our startups as well. Because I think if they get to meet them, then they're more likely to have that element of trust. That means that they can help them to navigate all of these complex systems that you have to do to be a successful startup. And then there's also, people like regulators as well. So, um, the I think, when we started out 12 years ago, regulators were super skeptical of startups. And that's gradually started to change as well. So you get things like the Financial Conduct Authority, now have what they call a sandbox. So you can apply to try things out in a sort of safe way with some of the financial services companies and things like that. Those kinds of innovations just didn't exist 10, 12 years ago, but now they do. So over time we've had to bring all of those different players and try to keep them talking to each other, keep them sort of energized almost about the overall potential for tech for good. And I think that's the way that we've managed to build an ecosystem. And that's, without all the things like, office spaces or accountants and lawyers as well, which you need as well. But they we found tend to, if there are startups that are exciting and they tend to sort of come along for the ride as well.
And if not to create more competition for Bethnal Green Ventures, really, but if someone in Scotland or Northern Ireland or anywhere in the UK was listening to this, reflecting back on how you guys started, how you approached creating what you've amazingly managed to set up, or perhaps thinking back on it, looking back now, what do you think would be the first couple of steps you'd recommend taking?
I think understand what the founders that you want to back are trying to do and what motivates them and what they need. So my previous background before starting Bethnal Green Ventures was I started an education technology business and found it to be it was pretty lonely, to be honest. There wasn't much help and support around, and it was really tough. And so I kind of had a bit of that first-hand experience of what it was like to try and start a business with a social mission as well. And I think that was helpful. But yeah, I think it's listening to what the founders or potential founders really need. And that is different depending on a little bit on where you are or what you're trying to do as well. But yeah, understand the problem, as it were, is the first step, I think.
Do you think that structures that are increasingly being developed to nudge business towards a social mission in terms of social enterprises, community interest companies? I mean, how well understood do you find these entities now, and how much do you think they help or support?
So to be honest, I think structures are sort of the second step. I think the first step for me is the products or the things that people want to build, and then and that should solve the needs and the problems that their users want addressed. So whether that's a GP surgery or a clothing manufacturer who wants to increase recycling. So that's the first step. The next step around like the legal form that you have or the kind of accreditations you need, all of that sort of thing, that becomes much more specific. And to be honest, what we've found is you're best off starting off as just a very vanilla company, like a company limited by shares is the most straightforward in the UK anyway way of operating when you're really early on, and that has the least amount of admin around it. And then what we find is as companies start to sort of develop and start to work things out, they can then start to choose or adapt to fit the system that they're in. So if you're in a system where you need a particular legal form to get the kind of funding that you want, then sure, do that, But I wouldn't start off with a legal form in mind and then like sort of design the product afterwards. I start with what do you want to do? And then like find the legal form that fits that once you've learned exactly how that's going to work and how it's going to grow and what it's going to need in order to grow. So yeah, community interest companies, the things like B Corp, all those sorts of things. They're great, but I would take them as a second step rather than starting with one of those and then deciding what you're going to do.
Okay. Well, when we put this out, I'm sure people would be interested to know if they were in the catchment, so they qualified, when would the next kind of time be to put
Yeah,
an application and any more information you've got where they could find out about it?
sure. So yeah, although we're called Bethnal Green Ventures, we actually fund businesses all across the UK and work with businesses all across the UK. And we've got a really good little cluster around the southwest actually. So there's a good number of businesses in kind of Bristol, and then we have a few businesses in Wales as well that we've backed over time. So yeah, and we'll be opening up for applications in May. Will be our next call for ventures, and that will be for us to those teams to join us and for us to make those investments in September. So yeah, we're we love working with businesses from all over the UK. For us, what's really important is that you're using tech and that you're committed to solving a social or environmental problem with it.
Awesome. Well, Paul, it's been absolutely fascinating to speak about everything you've been doing since Bethnal Green Ventures was created. Really fascinating to think how these ecosystems come up alongside, really, and that it's not just about the funding. We'll be sure to put some links in on the podcast when it goes out. And keep in touch. And thank you so much for your time, Paul.
Well, thanks for having me.
Everybody, this was another episode of the Community Health and Capital podcast for Notting Hill CIC. If you've got any ideas or feedback on this episode or future ones, you can feel free to email us at info@nottinghills.org. Reach out for us on our website or on social media, and we look forward to coming to you soon with another episode.